AG Lounge is made possible by Anchor. Anchor is a free creation tool that allows you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. It will distribute your podcast for you so your podcast can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and many more. You can record with friends or colleagues and edit your podcast right in the app for a seamless podcasting experience. You can even make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the AG Lounge by AirlineGeeks podcast. My name is John McDermott. I am joined, as always, by my co-host, Danny Giubertini.
Hello, everyone.
We are starting this week with a story from Ryanair. We've heard a lot from the airline over the past couple weeks about earnings, about crews, about bases. And one special story that we have today is about a plan that they have to close their base in Frankfurt. And we'd like to welcome one of our writers, Jose Payet, to the podcast to discuss the story. Jose, welcome.
Thank you.
So, as we're diving into this, first of all, just kind of introduce us to what we know about this story. So, from what I understand, Ryanair kind of offered pilots and crew based in Frankfurt an updated pay scale or pay proposal based on the coronavirus, and it didn't really go over the best with the pilots.
Well, so basically, Ryanair, what they have done Europe-wide is propose a 20% pay cut to pilots across different bases. In Germany, for example, the unions rejected the proposed agreement by a tiny 0.3 majority, which basically would involve reducing 20% of pilot salaries until 2024. The deal with this is that the airline would only guarantee pilots job security until March 2021, while they will make them earn less for the next 4 years. So there was a bit of a threat and a trade-off in that sense. And according to the union, that's the main argument against not passing the deal. No, that accepting this deal would kind of harm all of the pilot community across Germany, because on one hand, yes, you are kind of accepting to work under lower salaries and so on, and to an extent in lower working conditions. However, the premise lies on if one union accepts the deal, then you would go in some kind of slippery slope in which other airlines, such as maybe Lufthansa or whatever, would follow the same direction. So there's also some risk in there in being kind of the first movers in the country to go on that direction. Can create some sense of a trend amongst other carriers in Germany and in Europe into moving towards there as well.
Has there been precedent for that in the past of kind of a union from one airline striking a deal that's really kind of influenced how other airlines have taken that? Where have we seen that in the past?
I don't know. I think here in the COVID-19 pandemic, this is something that on one hand, it's quite expected. So you expect carriers to take that direction and kind of all of them to follow through with adapting working conditions and salaries to a new landscape, which is going to see the flying landscape to be much smaller. But on the other hand, you also have, for example, cases in which one first mover can kind of change the direction in which airlines are managing their relations with employees. No, I think one case is British Airways, for example, British Airways have been quite strict in the way they handle employee relationships. They have been quite firm in the way they manage relationships with unions. And you have seen, for example, this March, when COVID-19 kind of like paralyzed the flying world, Willie Walsh and his team taking a very hard stand in kind of like cutting jobs and kind of like doing some legal work to lay off almost 30% of the workforce, and in some cases also having a plan to have some of those rejoin the workforce later on at worse working conditions. However, we have seen then other carriers, such as Virgin, which is also in the news, or taking the same stance or going on the same direction.
We will get to Ryanair's earnings in a moment, but one thing that I noticed in your article that I considered to be really interesting is how Ryanair as a company will kind of change their strategy in Germany to respond to this failed agreement. So what do we know about, or I guess what can we expect Ryanair to do in Germany moving forward now that they have failed to strike this deal with the crew?
First, I think it's not certain that you can take this stance for granted, because Ryanair is known for reversing back on these sorts of decisions. For example, if we look at what sister carrier Lauda did in Vienna, in June they threatened to close the base in Vienna for the same reason. However, the Vida union then worked with the Chamber of Commerce to kind of like do a kind of like propose a new deal so that the carrier will keep the base there. In the case of Ryanair, I personally wouldn't expect them to drastically change their strategy in Germany, but I think they're kind of like taking this as a leeway for the union to respond and come back with a new deal for them. So what I think like more or less could happen is give a few weeks or months for the union to work on a new plan, or at least to assimilate the threat that is being posed on them to respond back. I don't know if you heard, like, I think Michael O'Leary even have said in some events that he thinks fear is a great motivator. So I think he kind of like is well aware that this tactic works to his and the company's advantage, and is expecting them to follow suit.
When the union kind of makes its counter plan or counter offer, I guess, if they do go that route, do you think we can see them make significant concessions? Do you think they'll maybe make a few demands, if you will, or a few extra asks of Ryanair to keep the base, or do you think they'll more or less just kind of stick with what Ryanair originally asked?
I think that's a tough spot into which one would be. I think on one hand, yes. I think one slippery point there is the fact that how do you guarantee job security? The fact that you are only saying pilots that they're going to keep their jobs until March 2021, well, they're expected to make a huge sacrifice. That's not that convincing, no? If you put yourself in the shoes of pilots. So I think the way they might expect to make some concessions with the company is tackling that point, no? So jogging some numbers and kind of like expecting to kind of like keep a certain number of jobs, like certain percentage of people in the workforce for longer than that, and also perhaps touching base on how long you expect them to take salary cuts. No, one thing is saying I'll take a 2-year salary cuts and then I'll see how things go then. Another thing is for years, no? Because the world is going to be completely different in 4 years, and pretty much no one knows how the market will respond. So I think that's also some other point in which there could be further negotiations and concessions from both sides.
I do want to touch briefly on what we know about Ryanair's financial position right now. They announced last week their losses, basically their financial report for the second quarter. And if I remember correctly, I think they lost maybe 200 million euros for the second quarter. I think right around that, maybe just under. Can you tell us anything about how those losses are impacting Ryanair's relationship with its crews, both in Germany and in general?
I think on one hand, of course, when companies make losses in the COVID-19, it goes for any industry. Well, of course, it's much worse in the airline and travel industry in general. You gotta separate, I think, the company from shareholders. No? So I think if you have a company that's burning 200 million euros in losses, that's a lot of money, and of course, it means burning millions in cash reserves every day. Of course, from the managerial point of view, it goes without saying that, of course, they're all asking, like, how long can we go with that? And B, how am I expected to ask my shareholders to put more money in the company if I have no guarantee that of when the market is going to pick up and when they're going to be able to make their investment back? You know? So that's one thing. And secondly, I think, yes, of course, after posting financial information and the company's positions, I would expect it to kind of like listen the extent of tension between management and the airline and pilots and unions, no? And pilots and cabin crew. Because of course, I think you as a person and as an employee would also ask yourself, you know, if the company is losing so much money a month and a year and so far throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, the risk of job losses become more imminent. You know, because how long can they sustain like that? That's one question. And our question is also like the fact that they cannot sustain to keep their payroll at existing levels. No? So for me, it opens a window to be more willing for subsequent rounds of negotiation. And as, for example, as a pilots union, such as BC Cockpit, be willing to make some trade-offs and more concessions in order to keep jobs.
And I noticed in your article that actually, like, around Ryanair's entire network in a number of different countries, a lot of pilots and a lot of crews have actually accepted this deal. Do you think that that the fact that Ryanair had so many pilots in other places accept the deal could impact how they act with these German crews that rejected it? Or do you think that they'll just kind of continue on and we'll see unions kind of act as they have in the past?
Look, we have the case of the UK, no, where you see almost 96% of Ryanair's Balta members have accepted the new deal, involving the 20% pay decrease. And you also have Ryanair reporting that 70% of pilots across its European networks has accepted the position. I think it can go both ways. One, yes, I think absolutely can be a mechanism for Ryanair to get what they want, which is something that the career has openly said that so, and that has been doing in the past. But B, also due to the unprecedented nature of this situation, I would also expect the unions in Germany to change perhaps their approach or be willing to make more concessions as they see how severe the situation is. No, this is a bit unrelated, but you see, for example, here in South America, last week, Latam Brazil laid off 2,700 employees because unions failed to accept a new deal that also involved pay decreases. No? So it goes without saying that due to the nature of what the aviation world is living right now, and where, of course, the flying market is tiny compared to what it was last year, and all around the world, it's easier for airlines to be in that position in which they can be, okay, if you don't do if you are not willing to make some trade-offs and operate in the future in new conditions, then I'm sorry, but there's nothing else we can do. No, bye-bye. I think based on what we're living at the moment, it becomes perfectly plausible.
Jose, thank you for joining our podcast today. I've certainly appreciated the discussion, and we look forward to having you on again in the future.
Thank you, guys. A pleasure.
Another story stories that we've heard this week come from the International Airlines Group, which is a body that owns a number of airlines, notably in Europe. So they own airlines like British Airways, like Iberia and Spain. And Vanny, I think this is something that you know a lot about. They've made a lot of announcements about how they're changing liquidity, how they're changing their fleets, etc.
Well, yeah. Now, of course, you know that the IAG, the International Airline Groups, is a group that is based in Madrid and owns a certain number of airlines, some of which have been recently shut down. The big one is, of course, British Airways. Then there's Iberia, and Vueling, which is the low-cost airline of the group. Recently, what has happened is that Level, which was a low-cost subsidiary of the group, has been shut down. They had Level and Level Europe. One was based in Spain, the other was based in Austria. Level Europe was short haul, Level was long haul, and they've all been essentially decommissioned. There is also Aer Lingus, that is the flag carrier for Ireland, that is still flying, but there have been some fleet reductions, as there have been throughout the group. IAG has posted a 3.8 billion euro loss for the first half of 2020, and that is against a profit of 806 million euros for the same period last year. Now, it's quite obvious to understand why of this change. Of course, is the coronavirus that limited traffic to essentially 3% of the traffic that was provided last year in the second quarter of 2020, and this actually caused the heavy losses that the airline, the IAG group, posted. From a financial point of view, the airlines seem to be in a reasonably good position. They have raised 2.75 billion euros in cash through various securities and bonds that were issued towards their debt, and also they've also raised approximately $2.5 million by auctioning off some of the art pieces that were scattered around the world in the British Airways lounges. As you know, the lounges for premium passengers are very kind of luxurious environments where there are some fairly precious pieces of art, and British Airways decided to collect all of these and give them to Sotheby's, the very famous British auction house, and they managed to raise approximately $2.5 million. Now, this is something that actually is done on a sort of regular basis by airlines that are going through difficulties. I remember that even Alitalia, when it was liquidated, when one of the several times it has been put into bankruptcy, and they had to cash in all the assets. They went around the world in all the offices and the lounges and collect some art pieces, and they managed to collect close to, I remember the last time was close to 6 million euros by auctioning off paintings and sculptures by famous Italian artists that had donated their work to Alitalia. Now, going back to the airline industry, before their earning call last week, British Airways kind of made the headlines because they essentially anticipated, and then they confirmed their intention to perform a very bold move towards their cabin crew and especially pilots. The move was supposed to interest approximately 12,000 people. They were requesting some very radical changes to the working conditions to their employment contract, and they basically said that if they refused to accept these changes, then all these people would have been made redundant and then hired again in lower numbers under different conditions. Now, this policy has been frowned upon, and let's just use this expression, by everyone in the airline industry, but also by the British government. And it was reported by Reuters just a couple of days ago that the British Airways CEO, Alex Cruz, who is running the airline, while the IAG group is run by Willie Walsh, a former British Airways CEO. And now Alex Cruz will have to appear in front of the Transport Committee of the British government next September the 16th in order to respond to accusation of unfair labor practices towards their staff. So the UK government will want to know if what has been done by British Airways is actually legal, and if there will need to be sanctions towards the UK flag carrier. Now, in the meantime, the scary tactic worked, because pilots accepted a 20% pay cut during the emergency, during this pandemic emergency. The pay reduction will be reduced to a -8% over the next 2 years, and 270 jobs will be eliminated. The proposal was approved by the unions. I think there was an 87% turnout at the ballot, and 85% of people who voted said yes. So this will actually improve, at least slightly, the labor relations within British Airways that was actually not very far from a strike, and the strike in a situation where traffic is already at very low levels, it's going to be would have been extremely damaging for the airline. Now, the airline is particularly hit by the non-existence of transatlantic traffic, because it's the airline that has the highest, that carries the highest number of passengers, and especially premium passengers across the Atlantic. Now, as you know, the countries in North America are pretty much almost closed for business. The United States are dealing with a raging pandemic. The sanitary situation is not very good at the moment, and Canada is essentially closed for business. Foreigners cannot arrive into Canada at the moment. So the North Atlantic traffic is just a tiny fraction of what it used to be. Now, British Airways has published the list of flights that will be performed throughout the winter season, and they have made some adjustments to the schedule, and they have also made some estimates with regards to the recovery of traffic. Now, by having a look at the extensive list of transatlantic destinations that British Airways has, there were approximately 23, if I'm not mistaken. Now they are planning to more or less recover to resume all the destinations, albeit with lower frequencies. What struck me was that they are planning to operate for winter 2020 and 2021 up to 8 daily flights between Heathrow and JFK. And that is in addition to those that will be operated by American Airlines under the immunized joint venture. So we are talking about an almost full schedule. So I think I remember that they were operating 14 daily flights between the two of them. And this is a significant expression of confidence in the London to New York market, because at the moment the traffic simply isn't there to support that kind of traffic, especially the traffic in the front of the aircraft is just not there, and that's what is going to drive the profits for British Airways and also all the other carriers. Now, they have recently been in the news also because they made a decision to retire with immediate effect their fleet of 28 747-400 aircraft. We talked about it in one of the podcasts, in one of the previous episodes of our podcast. After 51 years, British Airways will not have a Boeing 747 operating in their fleet. However, they are modernizing their fleet by taking delivery. They've taken delivery of the 787-10 in the last few weeks, and they will be operating the aircraft in a 4-class configuration. With regards to the other companies in the group, we have the grounding of all the A340-600 aircraft that have been operated by Iberia. We have 48 aircraft, Airbus A320s that were operated by Vueling, and then we have 9 aircraft that were operated by Aer Lingus that will be left on the ground. So at the moment, the fleet of the IAG group sees approximately 241 aircraft that are being parked over a total of 561. Now, this is the current situation of British Airways. From my point of view, what I think is going to be very interesting to find out in the future, and in both short and medium-term future, is what is going to happen to British Airways with regards to their position in London, and especially at London Heathrow. Now, we know that British Airways is the main carrier at London Heathrow. They used to have exclusive usage of Terminal 5. Now, that's not the case anymore, since a couple of carriers, One World Alliance carriers have moved from their original position in Terminal 3 to Terminal 5. I guess it's in order to make connections a bit easier now that all carriers have had to curtail their schedules quite considerably. Interline connections are more important than they used to be. So having airlines of the same alliance co-located in terminal will make connections a bit easier. Qatar Airways and Japan Airlines are operating from Terminal 5 at Heathrow. But the problem is mainly due to what is going to happen with the slots at one of the most congested airports in the world, and certainly the most congested airport in Europe. In the UK, the new government, the Conservative government that is led by Prime Minister Boris Johnson, has overturned the decision to support a third runway at Heathrow. Now, a plan to build a third runway at Heathrow, or in one of the airports in the southeast of England, has been going on for almost 20 years. And there doesn't seem to be any end in sight, because the decision was taken a few years ago to build a virtual third runway at Heathrow. So essentially, it was the extension of the northern runway to a length of approximately 6 kilometers, and 2 sections of the same runway could be used independently. Now, this decision had as its side effect the need to relocate a village of approximately 6,000 people. So this obviously didn't go down too well with local authorities, with local residents, and that doesn't seem to be a problem any longer, because that project at the moment has been stopped. There was an issue with capacity in the southeast of England, with the London Heathrow being essentially full, London Gatwick being the busiest one runway airport in the world, and then London Stansted quickly reaching capacity and asking for an extra runway as well. And then we also have a few other smaller airports in the London area, such as London Luton and London City Airport, plus London Southend. Now we have a demand that is a fraction of what it used to be. We don't know what is going to happen in the short term, and especially what is going to be the long-term trend, the long-term situation. British Airways has always wanted to consolidate all its operation in London at London Heathrow. Now, this wasn't possible for capacity reasons. British Airways had a significant operation at London Gatwick with some short-haul destinations and also some long-haul traffic that was mainly leisure-oriented. There was and there still is a significant operation to the Caribbean, to the islands that used to be British overseas colonies, and they still have some very strong ties to the UK, and also there is a very significant tourist traffic flow towards these locations. We're talking about Cayman Islands, Bahamas, Jamaica, Antigua, Turks and Caicos, Saint Lucia, and those kind of, and of course Barbados, that used to be the destination of Concorde, one of the two destinations of the supersonic Concorde. Now, I do believe that British Airways will want to consolidate into Heathrow, and given the current shakeup of traffic, they may actually be able to do it. I mean, I do believe that will be the number one strategic objective of Willie Walsh, that has always dreamt of consolidating into Heathrow, and probably has postponed his retirement. He was supposed to retire at the beginning of this year, and then he suddenly decided that he wasn't going to retire any longer. Maybe that's what he wants to achieve before he calls it a day with his aviation career. Now, but regardless of Willie Walsh's desires, it would be definitely ideal for British Airways being able to have all its operation consolidated in the biggest airport, in the most important airport in Europe, which is arguably the most important airport in Europe, that at the moment doesn't feel the capacity constraints that it has always felt in the past, possibly 25 years.
Before we move on, there's just something that kind of popped into my head as you were discussing that was where JetBlue, the American low-cost airline, stands. We know that they've wanted to fly to London for a very long time, and I think where British Airways moves, and I guess where IAG as a whole moves, if it could be logistically easiest for kind of all the IAG airlines to move into one big hub, if we could see, I something in my head tells me that JetBlue had wanted to fly into Heathrow specifically, but if BA takes slots, we could see them, I don't know, into Gatwick or into another London airport, which could hypothetically make their operations a bit easier if you know, another airport loses a big carrier that kind of lets prices drop a bit.
Yeah, we mentioned it a bit when we were talking about the JetBlue American Airlines marketing agreement that was signed a few weeks ago. Now, as the situation was standing before the pandemic, a pair of slots for international traffic into Heathrow were going to cost in the region of $60 to $75 million. And that's a significant sunk cost for a startup operation for into London for an airline like JetBlue. Now, the ability to tie up with American Airlines and the possibility of getting some kind of assistance from American Airlines with regards to ground handling and also the slots may actually make it easy for them to fly into Heathrow. But it's by far a done deal. Of course, if you want to go to London, you want to fly to Heathrow because that's the airport where everybody wants to go. It's the airport with the biggest traffic. From a prestige point of view, it's certainly the best airport, and therefore JetBlue will certainly have it as its number one goal to fly into Heathrow. That may not necessarily be possible. I do believe that Gatwick is a very concrete possibility at the moment. All the airports in the London area, Heathrow, Stansted, and Gatwick, were managed by the same company until approximately 10 years ago. Now they've all been split. what used to be the owner of all those airports. British Airport Authority now is just managing Heathrow, and Gatwick and Stansted are managed by separate companies. Now, Gatwick doesn't really have a significant transatlantic operation. It was only spruced up by Norwegian, but we know that the Norwegian carrier does have some liquidity problems at the moment. So having a transatlantic operation by someone like JetBlue would be, from a prestige point of view, a big deal for Gatwick. So I do believe that Gatwick will want their business, and it may be still a bit too complicated, even in these challenging times, for other carriers, for JetBlue, for a new entrant to fly into Heathrow. And the problem being that if you want to fly a transatlantic service, you don't have much flexibility with regards to the time that you can offer your service. I mean, you need a pair of slots that will necessarily be in premium hours, and they will come at a significant cost. So, I mean, I think it would be, it would be a really big deal for JetBlue to get into Heathrow, but I'm not sure it's realistic at this stage.
Our last story for today is another kind of combination. Over the past week or so, we've heard a lot of news from the Virgin Group. So the biggest brands out of Virgin Group, which owns however many hundred companies, at least the biggest airlines are Virgin Australia, Virgin Atlantic, and a bit of Virgin Galactic as well. So I want to start with Virgin Atlantic, because I think that's really kind of the newest, most relevant story that we've heard most recently. And that is that the airline has essentially filed for bankruptcy. So it filed for restructuring in its home, which is the UK, and it filed for Chapter 15 bankruptcy in the United States. So what that means is that in the United Kingdom, it's going to meet with creditors this month, I believe on August 25th. It'll meet with 4 different groups of creditors that will basically have to give it money in order for it to survive past the end of September. The airline has said that it's going to drop below the minimum cash on hand it needs per its shareholder agreements. Otherwise, it'll basically be forced to sell its Heathrow spots, which will basically force it to go out of business. So the airline really is kind of running out of cash really fast. And its Chapter 15 filing in the U.S. Was a move that it took to protect its U.S. assets while it's going through those negotiations in the United Kingdom. So I think it's important when we're considering this story to kind of understand why the airline needs to do this. It's really upheld that it even after filing, that its business model and that its operations are sound and are legitimate and don't have any problems. And I think that there's something to say to this, and that the issues that it's facing are in large part due to the pandemic that we have going on right now. The airline relies almost exclusively on long-haul international travel, which, of course, at the moment is not at all viable for really anybody. Not only considering the health effects of the pandemic, but also that a lot of airlines and a lot of countries, especially, have been forced to shut down travel from international nations. So, for example, we see that countries in the European Union, which England and the UK will be in until the end of the year, have effectively banned travel from the United States. So that is one especially notable market that Virgin Atlantic is losing out on. And the airline for a few months this spring was even forced to pretty much completely shut down its passenger operations. So I think from about May to early July, it didn't fly any passenger flights, which of course dealt a huge blow to its revenue, to its financial situation. So it overall, it's just lost an insane amount of money based on all of the combinations that have kind of been mushed together from the coronavirus pandemic and all the restrictions that have been placed on it. So the airline, as mentioned, has agreed to meet with 4 groups of creditors at the end of August, 3 of which have in some way or another agreed to offer the airline money, and the airline will in exchange put up a number of securities against those. So basically, if it defaults on the loans, if it defaults on its agreements, it will be forced to give up certain aircraft or certain slots, which of course, if that does happen, will be a whole new problem. But I think in addition to these creditors, it has taken, I think, almost £2 billion in loans or in agreements for loans to be taken over the next 18 months or so from a number of investors, including Richard Branson, which is the founder of the Virgin Group. So it seems, at least to me, that like the airline is gonna survive this immediate crisis. I think how it performs in the long run is really still up in the air, considering that pretty much every public health expert, pretty much every airline CEO and market analyst has said that it's probably going to be a few years before air travel returns to about where it was before the coronavirus pandemic. And of course, it's going to be about that long time, if not longer, for airlines like Virgin Atlantic to recover, since a lot of the early rebounds that we will see from the coronavirus pandemic will be in domestic travel. So even as we see other airlines around the world starting to bring themselves back and increase passenger counts, Virgin Atlantic will still be struggling for a while, since other carriers will have more of a domestic route network that they can fall back on and rely on to bring them at least some sense of revenue over the next year or so. In addition to this, about I don't know, maybe 12 hours after that was announced, Virgin Australia announced its own restructuring deal. Now, if you remember, back in April or so, Virgin Australia filed for voluntary administration and was bought by Bain Capital. And over the past few months, it's been working on its plan to move forward and to, like Virgin Atlantic, kind of recoup and kind of get a hold on where it is and get a base. So just as kind of a quick overview, the airline is cutting about 3,000 staff. So they'll go down from about 10,000 employees to about 6,000 or so, with hopes to increase back to about 8,000 in the coming years. And besides some of its charter and regional operations, the airline is getting rid of pretty much all of its aircraft types except the 737. So we'll see Virgin Australia become pretty much an exclusive 737 carrier. And then it's also taken some steps to kind of put staff on the back burner to save some costs and to kind of reshuffle back. They will also be kind of restructuring their route network. So that's partly kind of a side effect of restructuring their fleet, since some of their the 737 won't be able to serve as certain destinations that it's the airline's current fleet, like the ATRs it owns and operates, will currently operate. So some of the routes may be able to sustain 737s, some may not. So we may see reduced frequencies or reduced capacity. We could see certain routes taken over by different airlines that are contracted by Virgin Australia. Or we could see some routes completely disappear from Virgin Australia's network altogether. So those networks could be scooped up by other airlines like Qantas, or they could just kind of cease to exist. And then I think another side effect of dropping certain fleet types, like most notably the 777, which Virgin Australia currently operates, is that it's also dropping its entire long-haul international network. So it'll still operate certain short-haul international routes in the region. So kind of the Southeast Asia, for example. But some of its more notable routes, like to Los Angeles, for example, in the US, will not be operated for at least a few years while the airline gets its footing and kind of refocuses. Now, the Virgin Australia is entering this position in a worse place than where Virgin Atlantic is. Virgin Australia was about $7 billion in debt even before the coronavirus pandemic hit. So it already is bogged down by some extra burdens and liabilities that it has to retain. So I think going forward, it could be interesting to see how it handles this, to see how Bain Capital, which actually took out a loan to buy the airline, will handle it. So I think that would be kind of one of the most notable differences between Virgin Atlantic and Virgin Australia, and seeing how they rebound. In addition, of course, to the fact that they're operating on different route networks, one being predominantly international, one being predominantly domestic. So I think it'll be interesting also to kind of see how those networks impact their recoveries. To see if, for example, Virgin Australia can rebound sooner, maybe pay back some debts, claim market share from Qantas, which it has wanted to do for quite a while, versus Virgin Atlantic, which may take more time to recover. The last big announcement that we got from the group was Virgin Galactic, which has unveiled a new design for a Mach 3 aircraft, so an aircraft that can fly at about 3 times the speed of sound. It's kind of acknowledged in its procedure and its announcement that it's a bit late to the party of developing supersonic jets. We've seen a number of companies aiming to restart the legend, I guess, of supersonic travel after Concorde stopped operating. But Virgin Galactic is really taking advantage of a number of developments since Concorde, and in ways aircraft were designed and manufactured, and in new developments we know about fuel efficiency. So I think it's kind of a new card added to the supersonic race, and I think it'll kind of be interesting to see how Virgin Galactic plays a role in that, and to see how the supersonic race evolves and kind of how that impacts the group as a whole.
Well, seeing the demise of the Virgin Atlantic brand would actually be the end of the sad end to a nice tale that started in the 80s in the UK. Virgin was a company that was always very attentive to marketing, to branding, to making sure that passengers were having fun on board. They were the first one to put video games on board. It was famous, their decision. They were the first airline that made the decision to call an aircraft AOG, so unserviceable, because the in-flight entertainment wasn't working. So of course an aircraft can work perfectly even if the in-flight entertainment isn't working, but I remember that on that specific occasion the in-flight entertainment wasn't working and the 747 was flying from London to Los Angeles during a school break. So the aircraft was full of kids, and the captain said, if you don't give them the video games, they're going to tear the aircraft apart, and I'm not going across the Atlantic to the West Coast without the in-flight entertainment. So the kids won that time, and I guess they've probably been winning ever since. But apart from that, we should probably remember that we should probably remind our listeners that Virgin Atlantic is at the moment owned 49% by Delta Airlines. Delta Airlines decided not to put their hands in the pocket and finance the debt of Virgin Atlantic anymore, and that's what triggered the bankruptcy procedure. Now, the carrier unfortunately had a model that was getting older and older by the day, because they've always been outside the big alliances, apart from being partly owned by some of the big carriers. Before the majority stakeholder was Delta Airlines, even if they were just owning 49% of the carrier. There was Singapore Airlines that had a significant share of the carrier. However, they've always been more or less on the side of the big alliances game, and given that they were an international only carrier, they fully relied on point-to-point traffic, which from London Heathrow is certainly abundant, but it was very difficult for them to compete in terms of frequencies and in terms of products, in terms of products with the other carriers. We have to remember Virgin Atlantic, that provided the airline industry with their upper class bed. I mean, they were one of the first carriers that had that concept of the seat that turns into a bed. British Airways was there too, was at the forefront, but definitely they contributed to pushing the envelope of passenger comfort on board an aircraft before we had the big three Middle Eastern carriers and the Asian carriers like Singapore and Qatar to really push the boundaries of what could be done on board an aircraft. So unfortunately, they were never one of the most profitable carrier, even in their best days. And this crisis has obviously claimed them as probably one of the first high-profile victims. Although it's not written in stone that they will disappear. However, it's extremely likely that they will exit this crisis in a very different format than they entered it.
Yeah, I do think that they do have like an advantage in the fact that they're kind of so well known and so well liked and so well loved. But I do think, you know, there is something to say that that, you know, they still have a long road ahead of them. And, you know, again, considering that considering their business model and their emphasis on long haul, they are going to really have to change how they're operating for the next few years, and probably for a long time after that, to mitigate their losses and to just make sure they can get it, you know, through to the other side and see the light of day as recovery happens. So that's something I think that we'll certainly be keeping an eye on, and it probably won't happen right away, considering that, you know, creditors are willing to back them, that they are getting a fair amount of money over the next year or so. But I think if they can stick it out to when a recovery happens, they'll have a chance. But until then, I think it's very much up in the air for Virgin Atlantic. With that, we'd like to thank you all for listening to this episode of the AG Lounge by Airline Geeks podcast. As always, you can read more about all of these stories on our website at AirlineGeeks.com, or by visiting our social medias at AirlineGeeks on both Instagram and Twitter. We look forward to spending time with you again next week. And once again, we thank you for listening to this episode of the podcast.
See you soon.